Hello, everyone, and welcome to Page Chewing, episode 49. Wow. Welcome, everyone. And first, I would like to give my wonderful, talented co host, Taylor, a chance to say hello and introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, I'm Taylor. I am co-host of Page Chewing. My booktube channel is Made Between the Pages, as you can see below. I am also a reviewer on Before We Go blog and on Goodreads, all those good things. And I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And of course, our esteemed guest today is none other than artist, author, and phenomenal booktuber himself. I'm sure a lot of you have seen his stuff on BookTube, Mr. Brian Lee Durfee.
That's me.
Welcome, Brian. Thanks so much for coming. We're so happy to have you. Now, for those who aren't as familiar with perhaps your book specifically, can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Well, it's a trilogy. The trilogy is titled The Five Warrior Angels. Book 1 is The Forgetting Moon. Book 2 is The Blackest Heart, and book 3 is The Lonesome Crown. And they're just epic fantasy novels, sort of slightly leaning towards the grim dark side, so they are a bit R-rated. I get compared to Game of Thrones a lot. I also get compared to Tad Williams mostly. That's a general broad brushstroke description of the books. But they're kind of quest fantasy. There's political intrigue, there's gladiators, assassins, knights, princesses, kings, thieves, orcs. I don't call them orcs, I call them ogles in my book, but there's elves and ogles and dwarves and a lot of different creatures. The basic premise of the book is a long time ago there were these 5 warrior angels, and they had these magic weapons that they carried around with them, and they managed to banish all of the dragons and the demons to the underworld. That was thousands of years ago, before our story starts. When our story starts, people believe that the 5 warrior angels, when they died, they took the weapons with them to heaven. But some people believe that the weapons are still kind of scattered around, and that if they find them, maybe they can use them to their advantage. Some other people also believe that they are the 5 warrior angels themselves reborn. And so, and the plot just kind of revolves around this, all these different types of people racing to find these weapons. If they work or if they are even magical, nobody really knows. The scriptures that they read certainly allude to the fact that they will gain great powers if they wield these weapons, but nobody's really seen it. And that's kind of the gist of it. And so we just have like sort of a mad chase through this fantasy world of all these different characters vying to get these magical talismans to gain power.
Wow, yeah, it's fantastic. I've only read the first book, but it was phenomenal. I feel highly underrated, Brian. Like, I mean, this series has certainly, from my end as a novice, delving in the makings of something spectacular. And yes, I do definitely see. I know Daniel, our friend Daniel, had posted that a lot of things get compared to Game of Thrones. I Song of Ice and Fire, but he's saying it's actually accurate for your book and your series, and I do tend to agree. Like it has that feel of something that's going to be iconic and something that's really huge and epic in scope, and just incredible. I noticed.
For those that are watching this or might watch this that have never seen, this is book 1. I just happen to have one in the back seat of my truck. So
you got to be able to plug your own stuff. You got to have it ready.
Yeah, Yeah, it is beautiful, and the covers are just phenomenal, and just really capture the epicness of the books and what
Yeah.
transpires.
With the covers, I was lucky because most authors don't even get to say anything about the cover art, especially if they're with a traditional publisher like I am. If you're self-published, obviously you can do whatever you want, but people that get with traditional publishers like me, whether it's Daw Books or Del Rey Books or Simon and Schuster, they usually don't get a say in what goes on the cover. But I was lucky; my editor actually wanted my input, and so I got to choose which artist we used on all three books, and we used the same guy, Richard Anderson, and he let me approve the the super obnoxious, big, huge, heavy metal font. I was like, let's do it as big and bold and obnoxious as we can.
Yeah. Our friend, another great blogger, booktuber, black and blue collar reader, said that that the cover's so metal, like definitely true.
Yeah. Well, the font is actually called heavy metal, and it's called the heavy metal font. And my editor, we were the first ones to ever put this font on a fantasy or any novel ever. And then shortly thereafter, I started noticing it on dozens and dozens of books. So I guess people liked it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, I was curious because at first when I watched some of your videos and I knew you were an artist, I wondered at first if before you had done your own covers. So
no, I've got several videos on my YouTube channel about why I stopped doing artwork. And so if people are curious about that subject, they can just type in. I have I have a disease in my eyes, basically. It's called retinal vein occlusion, and it just really made it so I couldn't see very well. And I'm slowly going blind, so I just kind of stopped painting just because it was taking too long. And like paintings I used to be able to do in a week were taking months to do. And so I kind of stopped doing that. So when it came time for them to do the covers, I was like, I don't want to do them.
I understand. I was very sorry to hear that, Brian. And
yeah. If anybody wants to watch the details of that whole thing, I have a couple of videos, and all you need to do is type in my last name, Durfee, and the word blind, and those videos will come up.
I am so very sorry to hear that, but I will say that your art that you have done in your life is beautiful. It's gorgeous. A lot of it is landscape based, right? Or you did some fantasy work as well.
Yeah. I started in college doing Magic the Gathering cards, and like even back in the day, they even had a Tolkien card game that was pretty popular, which I did a lot of covers for that. Not covers, but cards. I did some work for Dungeons and Dragons and Lucasfilm. I did a lot of illustration in college, and then when I got out of college, I didn't really want to be an illustrator. I wanted to paint what I wanted to paint, and the easiest way to do that was to just paint landscapes and wildlife and take them to the art galleries and sell them that way, which I was doing fairly well at until I started having problems with my eyes, and then and that's kind of sort of at the same time I was transitioning into writing.
I see.
And and I've also done videos about my transition into writing too. And there's a foreword to The Blackest Heart, Book 2. It's about a couple paragraphs long where I kind of go into a little bit more detail on why I started writing to begin with.
So how is, I mean, you've done, with artistry, with writing, with booktubing, it's a lot of work. Obviously it's a labor of love in all three, but how is it enriched your experience? Or it's a lot of work to put in, like you've dedicated yourself to to these things. Like, what's it been like being part of that, being part of the booktube community, being a writer yourself, with the artistry you used to do? Like, how's that experience been, and what's it added to that?
Well, I'll start with, I guess, just the booktubing part. I just felt, I have a lot of friends that started when the internet was new, and I don't know, blogging. Is that where you write? You have a website and you write stuff on and people follow it. That's blogging,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
That became a big deal for a lot of my friends who were, want to be creative writers, and they would spend a lot of their time doing that, and to not a lot of success. And I realized that YouTube was the future of social media. And I started kind of watching a lot of YouTube video tutorials on how to start a YouTube channel, and it wasn't until I came across sort of the booktube community that I was like, oh, obviously this is a subject I could start talking about on YouTube, is book reviews and writing advice. I mean, and I started like watching like Mike's book reviews and a lot of the others, and I was like, I can do that. That's something simple that I can do. I won't have to invest any money into it. I can just set up my phone and point it at my face and just start talking away and put it up and hope people watch it. And so my goal was to film one video every day and upload it every day for a year onto YouTube. And either it's writing advice or book reviews or book rankings or just talking about books or painting or whatever. Just see what happens, see where it goes, see where I'm at after a year. And that's how I started it. And I enjoyed it. The thing was, I enjoyed it, and I haven't spent one penny doing it. And it shows. My television program on YouTube is the most low budget thing that is on YouTube. And I know it, my viewers know it. It's sort of become my trademark that the set will fall over, that I don't edit anything. Even if I say swear word, I just let it go. But I think people enjoy the fact that I'm so spontaneously silly and stupid.
When I was watching your videos, it brought me so much joy as a content creator myself. That I'm trying not to curse. That stuff happens all the time. Things fall over, you forget words, you say, that's not how I was supposed to say that. You have to back up and you have to say it again. And there were multiple times in your videos where you've just kept that in. And I was watching it, I was like, yes, I know that feeling. So I feel like as like a fellow content creators, especially, can really relate to that aspect of your videos. Your collection is also stunning. So you don't really need to do much more than that because you have that as your backdrop.
Yeah. And I wanted to, because you mentioned all of the other things I'm involved with. Like I'm a full-time writer. And anyone that's followed my channel or followed me on Instagram or Facebook or anything knows that I still have my full-time job working at the Utah State Prison. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years. And I've been a prison guard. I've worked in the gang unit. I've worked in the mental health unit. And currently, for the last 5 years or so, I've been teaching life skills to the inmates. And so now I'm just a teacher at the prison. And that's a full-time job. That's 40 hours of my week right there. And one of the reasons I keep the YouTube channel low budget is because, well, I have those 2 full-time jobs, working at the prison, writing books. I just don't have time to go out and buy expensive cameras and lighting equipment and editing stuff. I don't have time to edit this stuff. You know what I mean? That's the thing is, yeah, there's a lot of slick, professional looking YouTube channels out there. And maybe I'll get there one day when I retire from the prison or whatever and have more time to put into editing and fancy graphics and all that. But for the time being, I'm keeping things low budget just because of time issues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
It absolutely does. Yeah, it takes a lot of time. I don't think people realize until you start making content. Even filming takes time. Because another thing that I noticed is you do everything in one take. Talk about not editing.
Yeah.
And I wonder, just from a content creator perspective, do you rehearse ahead of time? I imagine you at least make a list of what you're going to talk about, because
I'll usually have
I can't do that.
Yeah, I'll usually have a piece of paper taped to the microphone stand in front of me, and my microphone stand isn't even a microphone stand. It's just a lamp that I took the light bulb out of, and I prop my camera up on it. But I'll tape a one-page piece of paper on there with just keywords, and that's it. So there'll maybe be a half a dozen to a dozen keywords on that, which will, and once I see the word, I'll know what it is I want to talk about. So that's the only prep I do. I read a lot. Oh, that's another thing I forgot. Okay, so we've got working at the prison, writing full time, and I read about one book every 2 days. Sometimes I'll read a book a day, and that's a 3 or 4 hour commitment per day too. So that's more. That's more time. That's like, it's insane.
When do you sleep? That's my main question at this point.
I sleep from midnight to 5:30 every day.
It's more of a regimen, and I get that. There is a question from a good friend of the channel, JBG Blaze, I want to get to, but I just wanted to comment. So you and I have something in common, that we're still in active law enforcement, and when it comes to that, I know for me, a lot of my experiences they've bled into my work. It's almost unavoidable, right?
Oh yes.
Do you find the same? That's and I know you can't necessarily elaborate on all of them, but do you find that some of your experiences have seeped into your writing?
Yes, for sure. And once in a while, even in a YouTube video, I'll mention, like, I'll be reviewing a book, a police procedural or a mystery novel, where something in the novel will have come up that will remind me of my own career. And I'll kind of mention that in the video, but then I kind of have to realize I can't talk too much about my career, because I've signed papers with the department that says I can't speak too much as an official representative. You know what I'm saying? And so I really have to rein in what I'm saying. But once in a while, I let slip different things about frustrations with the chain of command, frustrations with getting orders and directives and policies that just don't make sense to your job. Once in a while, I'll go on a mini rant about that, but I won't be specific. But the department that I work for, they know about my YouTube channel. But virtually everybody in my department watches my YouTube channel. They get a kick out of it. Some of them would probably roll their eyes at it too. What else was in your question there?
No, just if it tends to. My question mainly was if it tends to bleed into your writing. So
let's talk about the writing part of it. Yes, for sure. I think. Gosh, I wish everybody that was a writer could spend 10 years as either a policeman, a prison guard, a fireman, a paramedic, just some sort of first, or even in the Army or Navy or Air Force, just something like that, because you start to see the world a way different way. And unfortunately, with that comes you see the world in a lot of grim situations, and things I wish I'd never seen. But in a way, I would never trade it for anything, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes perfect sense. Obviously, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know for me that, as you know, we in these jobs have a sometimes a very dark sense of humor that we laugh at things that are perhaps inappropriate sometimes, and we do it usually just amongst our own company. And we also, I think, and I'm not sure how you feel, Brian, but the life experiences that I gained, like you said, there's some things you wish you could unsee in some ways, but at the same time, I think the life experience that you gain, and I don't know if it's wisdom because I certainly don't feel wise at all, but the understanding of human beings, seeing like the best and the absolute worst, I think
Hmm.
those are things that definitely, have
Yeah.
seeped into my writing. I don't know if you how you feel about that, but
Yeah. Speaking of the dark humor, yeah, you put any group of firemen or policemen or prison guards together with their buddies, and it is nonstop, just objectionable, foul, rough, teasing and hazing. It is like, I mean, it's like crazy. And the thing is that's how we cope, and we love it. And if anybody enters our circle and becomes offended by that, we immediately almost kind of like don't want that person around, because but that's how we cope. I mean, it's I see it with every, you know uh but most people would sit there and listen to us and just be like, holy shit, I can't believe how awful these people are to each other. And we are awful to each other, but we love every second of it.
yeah, and I'm gonna get these questions soon for you, but yeah, and it does feel sometimes. So I very much parse and dissect my law enforcement life with my so-called semi-regular life and my writing career and booktube and everything else I do. And there's my law
Yeah.
enforcement friends and family. They're really a family for me. And then there's my writing community booktube, and then sometimes things blur and cross because, like wonderful
Yeah, for
people
sure.
like Taylor. And of course,
For sure.
I'm sure like for you, a lot of people on my job, they've bought my books, they've supported me, they've watched me on
Yeah.
YouTube, and that's all great. But yeah, I feel that they're two very distinct lives almost, and that I take
Yeah.
one hat off and I put the other one on.
Yeah.
Um,
One of the things that with my writing that I learned from my law enforcement was, if I have a crazy idea, no matter how outlandish my idea is, go ahead and put it in the book. Because you can always edit it out later if it really does not work. And I'm telling you, of the thousands of just insane ideas I've had, I've really only edited out a few. Um, the problem is there's a lot of readers that, this is one of my pet peeves with book reviews is, oh, that was too outlandish, nobody would ever do that. And I'm like, I've worked in a state prison, and every single crime that's been committed has been done by someone that did something so outlandish that people can't believe it, but yet they did it, you know. And so when I see comments like at the beginning of my Forgetting Moon, there's a scene where the character gets stabbed like a dozen times, and he doesn't die immediately. And I've had some book reviewers be like, I put the book away right then because nobody can get stabbed a dozen times and not just die, and that's ridiculous that he kept fighting. And I'm like, I worked at the prison and I saw a guy get stabbed 124 times, and he lived, you know. And
Do you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, uh you know um people in battle, I mean, gosh, soldiers in battle have been injured and lost limbs and didn't even realize that they were that badly wounded until the fight was over, but yet they still fought for like hours and hours. And I guess one of my pet peeves with book reviewers is when a character does something that they find unbelievable, and so they just assume that the author is a moron for putting it in there. And I'm like, man, the world is full of all sorts of people doing all sorts of unbelievable, wild, crazy stuff all the time. And stuff that if you put in books, people wouldn't believe. But it happens in real life, you know. But they're not forgiving of authors for putting it in. That's a little mini rant.
Well, do you find that not only are you aware of these things, but do you find that you are able to write maybe an anti-hero or a villainous character with a more sympathetic lens? Because not only do you interact with these people, you've also mentioned that you work on educating these people as well. Mm-hmm. So do you find that that helps you write those characters in a more three-dimensional way?
Perhaps. Because I've read books by writers that have never worked in law enforcement or anything, and their characters are certainly three-dimensional, and their villains are certainly three-dimensional. I don't think you specifically have to be in my line of work to pull that off, but I do think it helps. I mean, yeah, the prison is full of, I mean, we got 6,000 inmates at the prison I work at, and other than about 24 of them, all of them are going to be coming back into society at some point. We've only got about a couple dozen that are on life sentences, and maybe only 6 that are on death row. But the rest are going to be living amongst us. And I would say that 95% of those guys are just regular guys and gals. They were just regular people that did something stupid one day that got themselves tossed into prison. Even if it was murder, drunk driving, they got hooked on drugs and started robbing 7-Elevens. I mean, most of them are just decent people that made mistakes or had habits or addictions that they couldn't break. And they really do, most of them own up to their crimes and want to pay. They understand why they're there and they accept it, and that's 95% of them. But there's also about 5% that are just straight up assholes that don't need to be back in society. You know what I'm saying? There's some that are just, you know, they're evil. But yeah, I think that they need to be given a second chance. A lot of them were forgotten by their families. They're good students. I've taught classes in high school level, at college level, and in the prison. And I would rather teach those inmates any day over high school kids or college kids. They are way better students.
Kids are vicious. They're vicious.
Those you wouldn't think it, but those inmates are such good students, such enthusiastic students.
I imagine because they want the knowledge. You know, I think when you take education for granted, sometimes you can forget how important it is.
I think it's 50%. They really, really do want to learn. I think it's also 50%. I'm giving them something to do during the day that's killing some time. I think it's a combination, but either way, it's cool that they participate so much in the class, and they're not disruptive. They're not. I mean, it's like they're model students.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's fascinating. That would be your observation from comparing high school students to inmates. And no, I totally get it. I totally understand. I do want to think.
Even when I was teaching for a couple of years, they assigned me to teach in the gang unit, and I was nervous because I was like, oh, the gang unit, that's going to be different than Gen Pop. I mean, these guys are hard dudes, right? And it was the best time I've ever had in my life. It was my favorite students were those gang guys.
Yeah, and it's funny how a certain cross section of society within the prison, you think, wow, but then when you get to know them, at the end of the day, as you said, as you so aptly pointed out, there's humanity in everybody. Sometimes that's to different degrees, unfortunately, but there is humanity in everybody,
Yeah, but the darkness does creep into my writing. I think there's a cynical view that a lot of law enforcement officers sort of get towards just people in general. And I think that I've infused that cynicism into several of my characters, not all of them, but several of them. I let my cynicism spill forth through their dialogue, if that makes sense. And some, so that can be fun. I can be like, well, this is something I actually feel, but I'm going to have this character say it. And,
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I want to pick a bit on that thread later, but I do want to get these questions because for our wonderful people in the audience, the first one from JBG Plays, he said, I'll just leave this here. He asks you, what's the greatest writer's block you've had yet? If you've experienced, some people call it, cold, going cold, different, terminologies, but, basically the inability to write.
I'm probably experiencing it right now because after my trilogy was finished, I started about a half a dozen other projects, and that's really sort of handicapped me because not any of the half a dozen projects have really sort of jumped to the forefront. And I really need one of them to jump to the forefront soon so I can bust it out and get it finished. Because right now I'm just sort of one day I'll noodle on this project and the next day I'll noodle on this project, and it's everything from a couple of horror novels. I've got kind of a police procedural mystery novel that I'm working on that's similar to like C.J. Box's Joe Pickett series or Craig Johnson's Longmire series. I've got a space opera thing that I've been noodling on for years and years. I've got sequels and prequels planned for the Five Warrior Angels, and I've got compiling notes and little scenes for those. But it's just that's probably, I've never really had writer's block. I've always got up and written, even if I'm not particularly thrilled to do it one day, I do it. Just because I know each day of writing stacks up on top of all the other days, and before you know it, you've got a big novel. So I know that just with patience and time and hard work, there is no such thing as writer's block. But I think right now I'm suffering from I've given myself too many options. I can't decide which option to go with. I think that's it. That's the one thing. Did that answer the question?
Yes, I think you answered it quite aptly. And it almost leads in a bit to this next question from the wonderful Eddie Castro, another friend of the channel, a great guy, fantastic reader. And Eddie asked, considering the series was supposed to be a 5-book series, was it difficult to condense it to 3? And will the rest of those stories be in future books?
Really, there wasn't anything I cut out of the story. Well, there was a side plot that I got rid of, but that was for the good. Yeah, when I originally signed and I mentioned this in the afterword of Lonesome Crown, how I plotted the book out to be 5. I plotted the series out to be 5 books, about 50 chapters each or something like that. And that was before I'd ever got a book deal or anything, or even an agent, And then once I wrote The Forgetting Moon, I turned it in, and I got a 3-book deal. And I had a pretty lengthy conversation with my editor and my agent both. And I was kind of like, I'm going to do 5 books. I'm going to do 5 books. And they're like, well, your contract is for 3, so let's plan on that. And so then I was like, well, can I make the books bigger so I can fit the whole story in? And they were like, yeah. So they agreed to that. So nothing from the story was really lost. There was one side plot that I did unravel from the overall story, which was good because that would have just been a frivolous sort of side plot. And so it helped me. I mean, I can write. I mean, I'm garrulous with words. One of the other knocks on some of my books is I'm too descriptive, and even being forced to be less descriptive, I was still quite descriptive. But yeah, pretty much every idea that I wanted in those books ended up in those books. Every set piece and action piece and plot twist remained. I didn't cut any characters out. Like I said, I only cut the one little side plot, which would have just been, pointless to have anyway. And I'm glad it's gone. It would have wasted a lot of readers' time. So nothing really much was taken out. We went from 5 medium-sized books to 3 big books. That's all we did.
That's funny how that works. Just reshuffling. Put some stuff
And
under
the
bed,
thing is,
reshuffle it.
what's crazy is, the crazy thing is I really like the way that the book 1 ended and book 2 ended. I really like the way that, because it forced me to change the end point of each one of those books. And I actually really like the end point of those 2 books better than the end points that I had already planned for the 5 books. So it actually worked out in my favor quite a bit. Yeah. And you know what? One of the things my editor said, which I didn't believe him at first, he's like, trust me, you're gonna be happier doing 3 bigger books than 5 medium-sized books. And I was like, well, what's the difference? He's like, just trust me, you're gonna be happier. And I didn't trust him for a while, but he was right.
A testament to editing, right? And getting another set of eyes on your work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So about that work specifically, I mean, I loved the one book I've read so far, and I know I'm going to love the rest of the series. I'm hoping to finish the entire trilogy this year. One of the things I absolutely love and I am drawn to without fail in fantasy books is when one of the main themes is about religion, especially religious intolerance, religious wars, competing religious ideologies, like that stuff. Just
how dare you take my question?
How dare you? Oh, did I? Oh, what great minds think alike. That's why. Well, you know what? Why don't you ask it? So seriously, go ahead and ask it, and I'll shut up.
No. I mean, I just find it so funny that we've done this for long enough that we know what the question's going to be about. But that was basically my question is, Brian, if your history with organized religion, is something that inspired the religious themes in your book, because even from, it is on my TBR, but even reading the overview, it's quite obvious that that's a huge theme. So that was exactly my question.
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to center this book. I wanted to have the conflict be religious in nature. No, it's not like the Lord of the Rings where there's a dark lord, that's going to just destroy everything, or there's no Voldemort that's just a dark lord that's going to destroy everything. It wasn't going to be like Game of Thrones. Well, Game of Thrones has some religious conflict. It was going to be the main thrust of why people were treating each other so poorly in this world that I created was going to be because they all believed in different religious dogmas that they all thought were correct. And it's similar to the way I felt growing up in this world we live in now. I grew up in I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska till I was, 10 or 12 or something like that. And then we moved to a small southern Utah town, South Sevier, which is about as bleak as it sounds. It's kind of like picture Luke Skywalker on Tatooine on his moisture farm. That was me living in Sevier County, Utah. But it was Mormon, and my parents were Mormon, and that's where they were from, and all my grandparents were Mormon. Everybody was Mormon. I grew up Mormon. At 19, I went on a mission for the Mormon Church for 2 years, like those boys did in the musical The Book of Mormon, if you've seen that. That was me. And then I went to a Mormon college, Brigham Young University. And so throughout all that experience, I sort of slowly over time lost faith in the religion I was raised in, and just stopped going, became an inactive member of the church, and just stopped believing it. And that all kind of happened around the same time as 9/11. And so then once 9/11 happened, and I realized that that incident was because of, religious fervor or whatever, I was really kind of angry at all religion. I became angry about it. And I wrote a horror novel where I explored a lot of my anger towards religion in that horror novel, which will probably never be released. I've been thinking of re-editing that and maybe putting it out or something, but I don't think I ever will. But then I was also working on these fantasy novels at the same time, and yeah, I did. I wanted the religious conflict within this fantasy world to be what propelled each character to do what they did, whether they were a devout believer in the religion or because there's 5 religions within my book, and they all kind of stem from what happened. When I introduced myself, I told you about the 5 warrior angels and their magic weapons. Well, these kind of became religious figures also, and so there's these 5 different religions sort of set up around all that stuff that happened, but everybody believes their religion is right, and they're the only ones going to heaven, and everybody else is a heretic and must die, and that was the basis of the plot, and that's probably going to turn some people off. I know there's been a handful of reviews where the people were just like, yeah, this was just too much about religious conflict, and so I put the book away. I didn't want to finish it, but I purposefully wanted it to be about a religious conflict, and work through some of my own issues that I had as a person that was raised in a devout faith and was devout for a long time, and because I know what it's like to be a true believing religious person, especially when it comes to the Mormon faith. I know what it's like to just blindly believe in what the leaders tell you and what the scriptures tell you, but I also know what it's like to start doubting that, and those conflicting feelings. And then I also know what it's like to completely reject it and just think that it's all silly, and how a person feels once that transition has happened. And I wanted in my book to have characters that represented all phases of belief and doubt and non-belief and everything in between. And I think I pulled it off good because I've been there. I've been in all those phases.
Well, you said some people, put the book down for that reason, but every book has an audience, and you have found your audience, the 2 of us, because you have completely sold me on that. It is something, as Pia mentioned, he enjoys reading that in his books, and so do I. It's one of my favorite themes to explore in books, because I find it so fascinating how humans can take the same event and have so many different origin stories or religions that spur from one event. And that sounds like something that you really explore, and how humans, we create this ourselves. It's like a chicken or the egg, right? We create these belief systems. And, people who are in those belief systems would argue maybe that we didn't create them. But I think from my perspective that we do. And it's fascinating to see the human nature and how we grapple with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is something that, again, as Taylor echoed, um, utterly compels me. It's things that I read about myself. In particular, the unfortunate byproduct of the cruelty and injustice that is done in the name specifically of religion, and that whereas the first thing that comes to mind when someone who is of a certain faith and is very spiritual and is very religious is that this is a person who should be, in terms of their moral compass, should sway definitely towards good, right, and upright, and however, when essentially, zealotry, when you take it to the extremes, it can cause, that same person to do some horrendous things in the name of something that is supposed to be pure good, etc.
Yeah.
Right. And I find that whole thing absolutely just so fascinating, right? And you, in your books, we see this very, dismissive brutality and tons of collateral damage. But and I said this in my review. Perhaps what's often most damaged is the actual, the one's humanity when these atrocities are committed in the name of religion, and it's exactly the opposite of what's intended, right? And I found that absolutely, in your books, it was really compelling. It was really chilling, and you did a fantastic job in depicting that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a scene about a third of the way into book one, because my book isn't really all that grim dark until about a third of the way in, and there's a specific village gets attacked, and I said I want to make this exactly, I want this village attack and this slaughter of this village and these villagers to be exactly what it would have been like if the Vikings would have rolled into northern England and taken over a village. So I studied a lot about what those Vikings did when they would roll up on shore in England and take over a village. And I put a lot of that in there, but a lot of it was, religious based, and shows like the Vikings and the One Kingdom. I can't remember the Bernard Cornwell one. What was that one called? But,
so there was the Saxon stories, the one that you did. Saxon stories.
They kind of touch on that. But so everything that's in that scene, I took right out of history, and it's brutal. It is like, and I wanted it to shock the reader. I wanted the reader to be like, okay, this is kind of a Wheel of Time kind of fantasy. Like, it's got kids in it, and they're young, and they're going to go on an adventure, and then, oh my God, what just happened? That was horrific to read. And I wanted it to be a shock. I wanted the readers to just be like, holy cow. That's what it would really look like if an overwhelming force just stormed through a small village. And it was religious based. And the thing is, the villagers, they have a little bit of spoiler review here, but they have a priest in the village that wears these robes that are blessed by the Grand Vicar. And these robes are supposed to be like more strong than battle armor. Like, the fact that the priest just wears them means that nothing could ever harm him. And the legends and the mythology around these priestly robes have just infiltrated every part of life of these communities. These priests are untouchable, and their robes make them invincible. And when this evil battle army comes rolling through the village, the priest sort of tries to stand up for them, and the villagers really do think that the priest will live because of his magic robes, right? And they are in shock when their faith is challenged in a way they've never believed it could be challenged before. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, that scene haunted me. It stuck with me. There's several scenes in your book that really resonated with me. That certainly, the torture that happens to this one particular character is, it is. I mean, it's just, it is shocking, even for someone like me. And
the priest isn't even the one that got tortured. It was somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. But it was phenomenal, and I and along with that, this theme of religion and prophecies. There's a lot in your books about the flimsiness of prophecies and how they can be misinterpreted and manipulated, and that they're all confusing and fickle.
Yeah.
And that as you so aptly pointed out, this reprehensible practice of using particular prophecies as a focal point of this, your particular religion, and justifies the bigotry and hatred for the other versions of the same prophecies, right? Because, like you said, all five religions essentially spring from this one, right? It is incredible to see that, it inflames like ordinary people, noble people, the clergy, all because of the schisms of belief, right? And all these ordinary people, warlords, rulers, they try to help see the prophecy they believe in come to fruition, and they're just caught up in this fervor, no matter what the cost is. No matter if the because some people always believe that the world should end, and they believe they're going to bring it about, and that but some believe that the cost. Okay, if we slaughter everyone, that's okay. It's just it was just incredible.
Yeah. And this is something that I felt within myself when I was a true believing religious person, and my faith, the religion I belonged to was telling me that I was a special person because I believed in this religion, and it's the only truth on the planet, and you're special because you have it, and you were like one of the God's elect individuals, and and that's real heady stuff, right? And it's not just the Mormon faith that does this to people. It's every faith kind of like builds up this ego in people, right? And you want to believe you're special. You want to believe you are on the right side. You want to believe that God has your back, that you are a special person to God. And so that builds within you. And I felt it as a young man when I especially was on my Mormon mission, that I was a soldier for God, for the Mormon version of belief, and that I was better than everybody else. And people feel this, whether they tend to admit it or not. You become a little bit arrogant in your belief, and that can be dangerous, especially when it comes to mob mentality, and that people can, groups of true believing people can gang up on other groups that they don't agree with, and war happens over that stuff. And there was somewhere I was going with this, but I can't remember. Something you said spurred me to say that. But anyway, it's on an individual level, though. It's and I'm not saying every religious person thinks that way or becomes that. I'm just saying it's a danger inherent in true belief, or believing you have the one truth.
Yeah, and you know what? I see a lot of parallels with the job. I see a lot of parallels in, when you start off, most law enforcement officers tend to be pretty idealistic, tend to be, pretty, a bit more zealous in certain things, how they approach enforcing certain, whether it's depending on what your particular thing that you find that you feel you need to clean up your corner of the world with. And as time goes on, I think most of us find that, people are human beings. They do, like you said, they do dumb stuff. We're human beings. We're capable of doing dumb stuff, irrespective of whether we have a badge and a gun. And, a lot more of our humanity comes to the fore, realizing that, you know what I'm saying? Like there can be a perception, sometimes true, sometimes not. Again, it depends on the individual, depends on, the group, the service, etc. That, law enforcement officers feel that they are, they believe that they're given this special, we are given a special powers, and we're given special responsibility, but that they feel that they are, they are better than, in some
Yeah.
ways, people. And the fact that we're given, things like the legal use of applying lethal force and all these things that come with the job. And it's something that I think it can carry you away. It can it can carry you away. You can go down a path that perhaps sees you feeling that your particular quest for justice is something bigger than everyone else. So
for sure.
So
no, I see it daily, and I'm guilty of it. The first 3 months that I was a prison guard, I was a douchebag to everybody. I was barking orders and I was mean about it. And, because I thought the way you gain respect from the inmates and the other officers was to toe the line, letter of the law, shout everything you say to everybody and make people march to your orders and be a stickler for the rules and make everybody fear you. But all I was doing was gaining no respect from anybody. I thought I was I was living a delusion that I thought I was the best cop that the prison had ever seen. But I realized slowly that, man, I need to dial it back, because this ain't the way to be. But I think every law enforcement officer goes through that period, because I still see it today with the rookie cops. Once in a while, I have to pull one aside and say, "Hey, dude, you need to calm down. You're taking this too seriously. You're going to get yourself beat." And the only reason you're alive right now is because the patient of those gangsters. You know what I mean? There's been a lot of that kind of stuff. But everybody goes through it. I think, and the ones that can break the habit early on will have a good career if they just, chill out, But some of them don't, and they end up quitting or getting hurt or something,
Yeah, and it is a job that, as much as there's a lot of positives in terms of, the pension, the benefits, and the job security, and all these other things that come with working on our jobs, there is a side that, it takes a heavy emotional, psychological toll that often manifests in things like PTSD and all kinds of social problems and alcoholism and all kinds of stuff that is not so fun. However, many of us, it's testament to human fortitude, I guess, that many of us rise above that and still manage to do the job hopefully as effectively as we can and as humanely as we can.
I think that writing, because we go through all the training about work-life balance and don't take this job home with you, and make sure you've got things outside of work that are important to you, and meditation and stuff like that is important. And I think with me and you, at least I can speak for myself, and maybe you feel the same way, is just being able to write stories and sort of vent some of your frustration out in the story is actually very therapeutic. And I've used that a lot, and a lot of, not just with my law enforcement and some of the stuff I've seen at the prison that I'd rather not see, but even when I was transitioning from being an active Mormon to a non-believer, that was traumatic in and of itself, because I was losing friends. My parents were certainly disappointed with me. I mean, that caused a lot of trauma. It caused me to get divorced from my wife. I mean, she married who she thought was a good Mormon, and suddenly I don't want to go to church anymore. Well, that ended that marriage. There's a lot of trauma with that I really did when I was writing. I expelled a lot of demons just through the words. And it's my way of meditation also. That and reading. Reading a lot too is calming to me.
Yeah, I completely concur with you, Brian. That's exactly how I feel. The writing is definitely catharsis. It's a way to, cope with some experiences that I've dealt with in my life beyond just the job. And yeah, like I think you said something really important. Like, I relish and cherish my relationships outside, like with people like Taylor, my people in the writing community, fellow booktubers, bloggers, authors. I cherish and my writing, holding on to something that is, like I said, it's very, it's something that's not what I do for a living. And yeah, that sense of being able to express yourself and cope with traumas and tragedies. Yeah, I've gone through. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you know, um, beyond law enforcement, you see this, with tons of people, that would say, some people never make, for us especially, but never make the job of your life because I don't know about you, but I've seen so many people, unfortunately, that the job was so much of life, and without perhaps the outside interests and the outside things to keep them going, as soon as they retired, they passed,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
It's crazy. It's crazy. Like there are like even at the prison, dudes will retire and then like we'll hear 2 or 3 years later that they've passed away. And I'm like, God, they were only like 53 years old, you know? I'm just like, I don't know what it is about what we do for a living that is like that, but I hope I don't fall into that statistic myself because I'm gonna be retiring in 3 or 4 years here.
yeah, me too. I got five, and I've really worked hard to cultivate a life, what I consider as a life outside of the job. Um, that said, like, and none of us know how long we have, but I think part of it too is that, and this, I don't know if this applies to writing. I haven't been writing for long enough to say, but I know this, that sometimes I think because you live your life, like you live your life like this, right? And there's, depending on what kind your job is too, and in our line of work, you can't always go into code white when you're off work either. So you live your life up here, waiting for this to happen, waiting for this to happen, being prepared for this to happen, training for X to happen, dealing with X when it happens. And that's a real, I'm sure, adrenaline rush. And in some ways, especially when you're young in the career, you really get off on that. But it's
Oh yeah.
hard to live like that at that level and do that 25, 30, 35 years, and then when you're done, it just falls right off, right? So I think that I'm no expert. I don't have an answer, but I kind of suspect that might have something to do with it, as
It
to
could. It could. Um yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And I apologize to anybody that's watching this or listening to this that came to hear about books and writing, and now we're
sorry, yeah,
we're philosophizing about our law enforcement
yeah,
jobs.
I'm
yeah,
soaking it all up, so I'm happy over
bad
here.
habit. Sorry, man. Sorry, yeah, I'm
but
sorry
uh,
too.
but when you get two people that have worked in the same career for a while, you kind of immediately hit it off and relate. But one of the things you said is, yeah, when I was younger, when I first started working at the prison, when those things would, when those incidents would come, it was just horror and terror and fights and blood and riots and I mean, yeah, you're excited, you just like you the adrenaline, you just want to be there, you want to be in the middle of it. And then after about 10 years on the job and that kind of stuff pops off in the middle of the day, and you're like, oh no, I mean, I hope somebody else goes to that, solve that problem, because I don't, you know what I mean? You're
Yeah,
you're anxious and a go-getter, and then after you've seen it hundreds of times, you're just kind of like, I don't need to see it again. I'll let the younger dudes go deal with that.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
feel. Oh, go ahead, Pia. I was just going to say, I feel like art as therapy, working through the things that you guys deal with constantly, whether it's, painting, whether it's reading, whether it's writing, whatever the form, or games, like you mentioned Magic the Gathering, whatever that form of art is, allows us to, I like to say, put a mirror back on our world and reflect on it in a safe space, right? So in a way that you might not be able to actually reflect on it on the job, because you are constantly on this high level, you have to be alert, you have to be in the moment. I feel like the way that you guys are talking about the stories that you write seems like it's allowing you to reflect on those traumas that you have to work with. So I feel like what you guys are talking about actually does have a lot to do with writing, because I think a lot of people put their life into their writing. It's very clear that that's a huge part of what you're reflecting on in your work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and trying to turn it back to the writing now. Brian, you definitely, with your characters, and I guess there's no, we're not totally off the topic completely, but I love Galt, for that reason. I loved so many of your characters, but he's that world weary veteran, been there, done that, seen the horror, been part of the horror, been part of the atrocities. He's got some issues, but there is still that underlying humanity. You hope that based on what he's doing, and he's putting himself, you almost wonder if he's got that wish to go out in a bang, because he's putting himself in situations that he knows can end well. And when in terms of going up against his employer, that I love that character for some of those reasons, because seeing so much of maybe you see so much of yourself, in as saying your eye as someone like that. But the characterization stuff was just brilliant in your book, and I think your life experience definitely shone through with.
Yeah, I've said this before in other interviews, but the character Nail, the young man who's the orphan boy, kind of represents me as what I was like at 17 years old. A little bit naive, a little bit, whiny and complainy, and just always kind of like, down on himself a little bit, not realizing that he's in the friend zone with the girl that he loves for, until it's too late. You know what I mean? That was me, and the Galt, though, represents what kind of I've become. Not all of his characteristics, because there's some characteristics of Galt that I don't like, but a part of it, like what you mentioned, he is this guy who he's been a warrior his whole life. I think if you were to ask him what he really wants out of life, he'd probably just be like, I want my wife and daughter. That's it. I just want to go live on a farm with them. But he's, but there's history with all that, and he knows that there's some big lies that have been told just within his own family, and that have to be sorted out, and they do get sorted out by the end of book 3. A lot of this stuff. But yeah, Galt is kind of like he represents a lot of my attitude towards exactly what you said. So of all the characters in my books that I would say have some of my personality in them, it would be Nail, the young orphan boy, and then Galt, the guy who's been in war his whole life and is just sick of it.
Yeah, and so well done. All your characters, again, so well drawn, and I think another thing too that really stood out to me in the characterizations. I mean, you had all the what people would say, are trope devices, but with, to me, a lot of great subversion of the well tried and true stuff. I think you did them expertly. You had the chosen one hidden away, the one who doesn't know their true worth. You got the gruff protector, the cynical burnt out soldier. Yeah, found family. But I think that you flip a lot of those on their head in brilliant, absolutely brilliant ways, and that's something that do you feel like was that intentional, like trying to take some of these tropes and
yes. Not only that, but book 2, because I did specific things at the ending of all of the 3 books that sort of the trope kind of gets subverted at the end of book 1, but then gets subverted even further at the end of book 2, and then just gets flipped all upside down again at the end of book 3. So it's kind of like the tropes went through a like I threw all these tropes as like bingo balls inside of a bingo, turner thing, the thing that they crank to take the bingo balls and it just goes like that. That's what I did with the tropes through all of the books. And so they're just everywhere, and you never know which when the bingo thing is going to spit out another trope, with a crazy twist ending, or maybe it ends exactly the way that trope is supposed to end and has ended in all the other fantasy books. But I wanted it to just be, I wanted the reader to be guessing the whole time, is like, what really is going on here? Everything's a mystery up until the very end, and even the mysteries that we thought we solved at the end of book 1 or end of book 2, those aren't even like, those were all maybe or maybe not red herrings. And I really wanted to do that with the whole trope thing and the whole subverting of tropes. And yes, I did plan this. This was something that I planned when I was 12 years old. The first book I ever purchased with my own money was The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. And I was just a kid. I saw it, in the bookstore. I got it, and well, actually, I mail ordered it. It was a mail order book. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But about 80 pages into that book, I was so fascinated. This is the first fantasy book I'd ever read. And I was just swept away in the magic and the wonder of it. And by page 80, one of the characters, I can't remember exactly what page, but one of the characters said something to another character. And I was like, as soon as I read that line, I was like, I'm going to be a fantasy author, and I'm going to base my entire series off of that one line. Which I did, and I pulled it off. I won't tell you what the line is, but it's somewhere within the first 100 pages of The Sword of Shannara.
Wow. Well, I read the Sword of Shannara years ago, obviously, but I read quite a few of the Shannara books. But I'm gonna be furiously trying to dig that out and reread.
Yeah, way to dangle that carrot.
What the hell that was about. So wow.
I love that you're able to bring that to fulfillment. And that actually leads.
No, I've told that story. I've told that story several times, even on my own YouTube channel and in other interviews. And there have been some people that have figured out what line it is.
Ooh. Now you're challenging us directly. I'm consider challenge accepted. But that leads perfectly into a question that I always like to ask, where we've talked a lot about in this interview that you write what you know. And obviously all of your life experiences have been put into this work. But I'm always fascinated by origin stories. So clearly the Sword of Shannara is a very big one for you. But I'm curious if there were any other stories in your life, not just books, but maybe games. I know that Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, you're into a lot of these things. If there's any stories in your life that have inspired you, not just that one line, but to become the writer that you are today outside of that particular story that you just told.
I will tell you right now, I was influenced absolutely 0% by games, Magic, Dungeons and Dragons, or video games, because I had never played any of that. So that's right, straight out. However, I was aware enough of Dungeons and Dragons to know that there's these different races and classes. Like there's the paladins and the rogues and the monks and the magic users and the thieves and the assassins and the elves and the dark elves and the chaotic and the neutral and the. I'm aware of it to that extent, right? I never played it though. So when I was writing, of course, or writing my own books, I had read maybe thousands of fantasy novels. So you don't need to be a fan of games like Skyrim or Oblivion or Dungeons and Dragons or Magic to be able to be inspired. You can just be a voracious, I don't know what the word is. You just read a lot of fantasy books, and that is your school. And so I was not inspired by anything like games, but gosh, I could have just shortened it down to that sentence. I was not inspired by games. But I was inspired by a lot of the other books I read. I was inspired a lot by my youth, when I was young, living in Alaska, my father was a hunter, and he would take me out on a lot of these hunts. He would go on moose hunts, grizzly bear hunts, caribou hunts, Dall sheep hunts, big salmon fishing trips. And we would go into some really gnarly, dangerous parts of Alaska. And that inspired me and my writing a lot, because if you read my books, part of the adventure, a big part of the adventure that the characters go through is just based purely off the landscape they're traveling through. Especially in book 2, The Blackest Heart, where they go into some areas and some parts of this fantasy land I've created where it's just Mother Nature is going to kill them. There's glaciers that they adventure through. There's mountains and cliffs and rivers and oceans that will just swallow you up. And I learned that, and I was inspired just by being a kid in Alaska and going on these crazy adventures with my dad that most people never get to go on. And if you search deep enough on my YouTube channel, my dad filmed a lot of this, and I was just a little kid, and I'm in these videos, and I put them up on my YouTube channel, some of this stuff, some of our whitewater river rafting trips, and some of our moose hunting trips. And so if you just want to type in my last name in Alaska and the word Alaska, you'll find those videos. But yeah, the landscapes of Utah also are pretty spectacular too. And those also played a part, because when we moved from Alaska to Sevier County, I went from the Arctic north to the desert southwest. And we moved in July when it was like, Alaska's cold, and then we moved to southern Utah, which was like 114 degrees. And I thought I'd move straight to hell. And it's a desert, and but the deserts are beautiful in their own way too, and they're magical too, and they've got history and mythology. The American Southwest is like it's like a magical place. If you just and so that stuff inspired me. Was that what you were looking for?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's an amazing answer. I love nature hiking in all of my free time. That's what I do. So you're selling me more and more and more and more on these books the more you talk about them. But what a fascinating experience to have under your belt.
Yeah.
Truly.
As far as other books that inspired me, I've talked a lot about this on my YouTube channel, but I'll mention them briefly here. Is of course, The Sword of Shannara was the main inspiration when I was a kid, but then Tad Williams became a huge influence when I got a little older and could appreciate good prose and good writing. And that was the first writer that I'd ever read where I really started to appreciate how the author was stringing together sentences and words that were beautiful. And then the novel Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett opened my eyes to the fact that medieval England was not a very pretty place to live. And then I read Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which is a Western, and that probably influenced me the most. If I was to say that I'm trying to mimic or copy any writer out there, the closest that I've tried to mimic and copy somebody, and when I say mimic and copy, I really studied this guy's writing style. That was the Larry McMurtry Lonesome Dove series. And there's 4 books in that series, and I just think they're brilliant, and I wish I'd written them. And I try to model what I'm doing kind of after those books.
Yeah, and I know for me in your work specifically, Brian, I've definitely, and Tad Williams was on the show recently. I definitely, and having read some of his books, I right away saw that nexus between specifically your work and Tad because of the character work. You spared nothing in terms of really elaborating on your characters and making them feel like real people. and with all their complexities and flaws and warts and hopes and false hopes, and it was just, you put so much detail into that, and that really grabbed me because I am a huge Taylor is as well character based reader, and I absolutely adored that part of the book, and I wondered, I was going to quickly ask you, when you write characters to that depth, um, and then I haven't read the end of the series, but obviously at some point the book is over. I know you're saying you're planning to write prequels and et cetera, perhaps other books in this world, but is it like you lose a part of yourself when these characters are like done with? I'm still writing my series, and I don't know how I'm going to feel when I'm no longer dealing with these characters that I've put so much into. So how does it feel when you shut the door on them, and especially after the work you've done?
I've never really felt bad about that ending the story or the characters there. I've never felt bad when I've written the death of a character. I've never felt bad for that character. You know what gets me teary-eyed is the reaction. Like if a character dies, what gets me teary-eyed is the reaction that my other characters have to that death. That's what gets a lump in my throat when I'm writing. It's not the death of the character; it's how the other characters are feeling about that death. But to get back to Tad Williams for a second, when I was first trying to get published, I was approaching agents, and so I approached Tad Williams' agent, and Tad Williams' agent also represented Pat Rothfuss and a handful of other fantasy authors that had written really kind of large books. And I specifically said, hey, I'm approaching you because you represent Tad Williams and Pat Rothfuss, two of my favorite writers. They write very large books. I've got a very large epic fantasy series here, so I know you're not going to be scared of it. Will you give it a chance? And of course, one thing led to another, and my books are published, right? And so my agent was coming to Salt Lake City for the Salt Lake City Comic-Con, and he invited Pat Rothfuss and Tad Williams to come with him. And so I got to meet Tad Williams. And it's like meeting your hero, if you're a fan of Michael Jordan and then you get to go to dinner with Michael Jordan for 3 nights in a row. I mean, how would that feel, right? That's the way I felt with Tad Williams. And because if you would have said when I was a kid reading Tad Williams that, hey, one day you're going to be a fantasy author and you're going to be hanging out with this dude and you're going to be his friend and all this, I would have been like, wow, no way, I think when Tad Williams gave me a blurb for book 2, because Blackest Heart and Lonesome Crown, on the cover, we put the Tad Williams blurb, and I think I was more excited about that than I was about actually getting a book deal. So.
Yeah,
And I know people say, oh, don't meet your heroes, but I can say confidently from meeting Tad Williams as well, he is a phenomenal person. Just,
Yeah. Now, if you want to watch the video that we made at Comic-Con, we did our Tad and me and my agent and some of my agents, other writers, we did a video at the Comic-Con that's on my channel about how to get published. So if any of you are out there listening and you're a writer or a wannabe writer or want to get published, watch that video, because we talked for a whole hour about how to submit your work to agents, how to behave as a professional writer, and how to get a book deal. It's probably one of my favorite videos I've ever done.
That's fantastic. Thanks for referencing that, because there's a lot of aspiring authors out there who want that advice, who crave that advice, especially from two professionals of your caliber and that of Tad. And yeah, I agree with Taylor. Tad is just a wonderful, we obviously haven't met him in person, only virtually, but just a wonderful human being. And he was so generous with his time, like you, and coming on and talk to us. And I'm looking at the your gorgeous covers as I'm holding up now, and I'm looking at, for the Lonesome Crown, the quote, from Tad there. Durfee writes with guts, heart, and a powerful and obvious love for the fantasy genre. And then the one on The Blackest Heart, another absolutely stunning cover. That he's written the same thing. So I mean, that must have been what a highlight of the career to have Tad Williams blurb your book. So yeah, kudos to you for having that.
Yeah, it's cool. It's beyond cool,
Yeah, and when you meet I can say the same thing. Having I mean, Jenny Wirtz, who you've read as well, and enjoyed her books. She is another absolutely wonderful human and my favorite author. And she was willing to blurb the cover of my most recent
that's
book.
Cool.
And
that's cool.
Yeah, and I mean, you just, like you said, you never think that someone who you consider iconic is going to be, you're going to have that relationship with, right? But that's the cool thing about doing the stuff that we do, whether it's blogging, writing, booktube, whatever, but we're all human beings, and we're all looking to forge connections in the space and do good things, and have people meet like-minded people, and it's all a good thing. It's definitely all a good thing. So I know we've taken up so much of your time. You've been so generous, Brian. It's going on an hour and a half. As Taylor and I will say, these things go by so fast, right? That we, but I know Taylor probably has some final questions perhaps for Brian as we're wrapping up, and then we'll get into some closing.
I probably got about 15 minutes left, so we're good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll let Taylor over there.
Okay. Well, it's a bit of a switch in what we've been discussing thus far, but something I find so fascinating about your body of work is all the different forms of art that you do, whether it's actually painting, writing, whatever, or, creating booktube content. And I'm curious if you have a perfect environment for doing those things, right? So if you like silence, if you have music that you like to put in the background, what inspires you to get in that mood to be creative?
Okay. Yeah, so when I'm reading, I like to just be in a cozy spot, and I've done some videos of sometimes I'll just drive my truck up into the mountains in Utah, throw out a lawn chair and read a book all afternoon just in the wilderness. However, when I'm but mostly I read just at my house, in different parts of the house, and or on my front porch. I read on my front porch quite a lot. Painting, I listened to a lot of music, and writing every single word that I've ever written was written with classic rock playing over my stereo with the volume turned up to stun. And when I say classic rock, I mean Guns and Roses, everything from the Beatles to Guns N' Roses to Fleetwood Mac to Journey or REO Speedwagon or Motley Crue or Poison or Heart. I mean, I could keep going on. I've been collecting classic rock CDs. Mind you, I do not do streaming music. I do not do streaming music. I don't have an iPod or whatever they're called, or a MP3 player or whatever. I don't know what the kids use nowadays. But I still have all the classic rock CDs that I bought from the time I was a kid up until now. And I've got probably 1,000, got every Kiss album, every Rush album, every, all of them. Bryan Adams, you just keep going on. John Mellencamp, everything. Bob Seger, but Metallica, Bon Jovi. But always it has to be turned up so loud that your ears bleed. And that's how I've written. Every single word I've ever written was in that environment. In my writing studio, I disturb the entire neighborhood when this goes.
They're like, oh, Brian is writing again.
Yeah, Brian's writing again.
As someone who played drums for a large portion of my life, I know the feeling of disturbing the neighborhood. You know, it was like, sorry guys, it's practice time. You know.
Yeah, and I don't know why or that's kind of what I did when I was painting, and I just sort of transitioned into the same thing for my writing. So
that is phenomenal. I do want to get to this one last question instead of my question. It's Eddie posed it. He just wanted to know quickly, Brian, did Tim Reynolds, I presume that's the audiobook narrator, finish recording The Lonesome Crown?
So Tim Gerard Reynolds is doing The Lonesome Crown. It's supposed to be out in October, from what I know, but we had to wait. Audible.com is, once I signed the contract, there's really not a whole lot I can do. They do what they do, and they Tim Gerard Reynolds did the voice narration for book 1 and book 2, and they wanted to keep that consistent for book 3, which meant that they had to wait for an opening because he's become one of the most popular voice narrators, and so they decided they would wait. So the audiobook has been delayed a year because of that, which I'm fine with the delay. I wanted Tim Gerard Reynolds to do all 3. Tim Gerard Reynolds and his English accent makes even some of my clunky paragraphs sound brilliant. Because there are sometimes when I will reread parts of, especially book 1, not so much book 2 or book 3, but there are some passages in book 1 that still kind of make my eyes hurt when I read them, but then when he reads them, they sound brilliant. I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, it's amazing
what
a brilliant audiobook narrator can do. We had Travis Baldry on the show, and of course now he's also a New York Times bestselling author. But just someone who can really enhance your writing when you put it in that form. So fantastic. But listen, again, we've taken a lot of your time. I do want to allow some time for closing off here. First, to give my wonderful and talented co-host Taylor a chance to let us know where to get a hold of you, where we can find you in the various spaces that you occupy, etc.
So the best place to find all of the links for everywhere I'm involved in is my Booktube channel. So that is Made Between the Pages. It's been on the screen with my name throughout this interview. But in the description of those videos, you can find links to my Twitter, where I do a lot of my bookish, I share a lot of my bookish content. I just recently joined Threads as well. So, Battle of the Billionaires. I'm on both of those platforms. You can also find me on Before We Go blog, which I mentioned at the beginning, run by Beth Tabler. I am a assistant editor there as well. So you can find me on PL's channel as well as his co-host. So if you would like to find any of those links, they will be in the description of my videos. And thank you so much for joining us. I wanted, before we finish, I want to say thank you so much for joining us, Brian. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. And I feel like I just got to sit down and soak in so much life knowledge today. So I really appreciate your time.
No problem.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'll quickly run down mine because I want to give Brian the last word to talk about where we can find out about him and his Booktube channel, his books, etc. So on PL Stewart quickly, I'm also an assistant editor with Before We Go blog under the wonderful Beth Tabler. Shout out to Beth. The books at www.plstewart.com. That's where you can find out about the books and the writing. And of course, Page Chewing, our creative interview feature. As Taylor said, frequently you can find me on her channel. All of just quickly in the thumbnail, links to all the social media of all 3 of us, Brian's YouTube channel, his writing, etc. We're going to let him say that himself, but they're all in the thumbnail as well, and for Taylor and myself. So if you're wondering where that is. So, and of course, to echo Taylor, Brian, thank you so much for coming on. It's just been amazing talking to you. Just a great human, and it's been phenomenal. So Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you enough. And yeah, like to give you the closing off here with talking about where we can find out more about you and all the things that you do.
Yeah, well, thank you guys both for having me on your show, and I enjoyed the chat. And just I'm the only Brian Lee Durfee on any of the social medias. So you just type in my name, I'll be the only one that shows up. And it's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Twitter, I don't understand, so I don't use that one very much. But Facebook and Instagram, I'm pretty active on those, and of course YouTube.
Fantastic. And please, and folks, if you're wondering about, you're looking for your next epic fantasy read, this series again, phenomenal, great cover art, really deep. If you like Tad Williams, if you like writers like that, this is an author you should be definitely picking up. I can't wait to get to the rest of the series. I have all three. I just haven't had the time to do much of anything recently, but they are definitely going to be read at some point in the near future. So that's it here for Page Tuning episode 49 and the wonderful Brian Lee Durfee as our guest. Taylor and I have been so happy to have this chat. And we will be joining you for Page Tuning episode 50. Can't believe we're almost there in a couple weeks. So more about that on all of our social media. So once again, guys, thanks so much. Thanks to everybody in the chat for stopping by and posing your questions and your comments. And we will see you again soon. Take care. And bye-bye now.
Bye.